Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run! Marshawn Lynch, get off me!
DK. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you want.
This offense, just in general. I mean, you had
To
a
me,
guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man. All the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hawks Zone Rundown. I'm Armac. That's B Rice. Guys, lots to talk about today. Rob Staton coming on the show today to join us. Rob from the BBC, also Seahawks Draft Blog.com. He's going to join us to talk free agency, how we looked, how he thinks we did in free agency as a whole, and really dive into the latest free agency pickup of Sam Howell from the Commanders. Get his thoughts, what he thinks. Does this affect how we look at a quarterback coming up in this draft, and a lot more with Rob. But before we get ahead of ourselves and get into any of that, guys, little housekeeping to take care of. If you like what you're hearing, like what you're watching with the channel, guys, please give us a subscribe and hit the like button and hit the notification button down at the bottom, and that really helps out the channel, keeps bringing in the guests that we're bringing on, and just all the content and in general, and everybody that has been subscribing, we appreciate the support. So hey, B Rice, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just trying to keep up on all these acquisitions, trades, the NFL news, getting ready for that draft now that free agency is officially underway and we're filling in some of the roster holes. So, yeah, it's an exciting time.
Yeah, it is. We're going to get into all that with Rob, and we're going to talk a lot of Seahawks stuff. But before we get him on, real quick, couple interesting things. Justin Fields signed now with the Steelers. That sort of surprised me a little bit. We thought maybe on last pod we were throwing Fields around as a potential guy that could be on our roster, especially as the market went on. We even threw out the Steelers like, hey, talking about guys that have homes now, hey, they don't need a quarterback. They just signed Russ to a 1 year. Interesting now they have Russ probably going to be, obviously they're going to be the starter where Fields is backing up. What's your thoughts there, and how's that all going to work out down in the Steel City?
That whole thing was kind of interesting for me because, you looked at it and Omar Khan, who's their general manager, came out and stated, just before the combine, they were so happy with Kenny Pickett and he was going to, they believed in him, and kind of the same kind of verbiage and terminology we had seen with the Russ situation in Seattle when, they were trying to move Russ. And then they bring Russ in, and after they bring Russ in, they tell Kenny it's an open competition between you and Rush. Kenny apparently had no problem prior to that knowing that they were going to have an open competition. But as soon as Rush showed up in the picture, things changed and he wanted out. And he was like, nope, I'm done. I'm out. I want out. They trade him to the Eagles, which to me, just from Kenny Pickett's point of view, I don't exactly understand the logic in leaving when you look at who you're competing against to start against Russell Wilson, which, let's be honest, is not the Russell Wilson we remember in his prime in Seattle. Or you're going to go compete against a guy in Jalen Hurts who you're not competing with. You're just going to be the backup. So that was interesting. And then the whole Fields trade, how it came down to, and you looked at that market, and what's crazy to me, and, a lot of our Seahawks fans have been clamoring since obviously we made, like you said, our trade for Howell. Why didn't we go after Justin Fields? Well, if the entire NFL wasn't touching this guy until the Steelers literally had him fall in their lap for a 6th-round compensatory pick that could turn into a 4th based on how much he plays, tells you what the NFL executives and GMs and scouts all thought of this guy, which I think he's a phenomenal athlete, but I don't think he's a great quarterback right now, which being a quarterback is understanding the game, making the reads, making the throws. That's really what you're paid for. It isn't your running ability. Look at Lamar Jackson. Lamar is phenomenal. But Lamar every year has the problem when teams make him throw, he can't consistently win you a game that way. Justin's in that same boat until he proves otherwise. So for me, I think it's going to be interesting. I think Russ and, I think Fields can learn a lot from Russ. And if he's open to doing that and sitting on the bench, which apparently he is, and getting a reset, I think that's, kind of, it's not a bad situation for Justin Fields, really. There's no pressure now.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Interesting about Pickett. I mean, I'm never high on Pickett, but yeah, you look at that situation. It's like, dude, Russ 35. There has been leaks of like them extending Russ, but now for Pittsburgh, it's just they got the luxury of saying, let's wait and see if Russ just balls out. Okay, maybe I don't know, maybe give him a couple of years or something like that. If you think, okay, Justin's still going to be here, but again, but the thing about that is that you got to make a decision on field. So I think it's a matter of like you got two guys in there, and they're going to figure out which one they want to move on in the future. I think for me, Russ really has to like ball out because of his age, and because of what we've seen the last few years. I think Fields is so young that I think they got to go into it being like, okay, you know what, this is sort of the long-term plan. You always have to have a long-term plan. So if they really, I think they're bringing in Fields to be the long-term plan, but again, you also have to be prepared to pay that guy. So I think when you look at the Seahawks and tying this back to Seattle, where you're like, that could also been a Mike McDonald conversation. You brought up Lamar. Mike was there, right, every single day with Lamar, and he knows, hey, this is his shortcomings, this and that. So if you think, hey, if this guy sort of reminds you of Lamar, like you said, look at his shortcomings when it really comes down to it. So, and then you say, okay, you know what? He's off the table. Who else is on the table? And then, you look at a Sam Howell, and young dude bringing this guy in to be a backup for Geno, and potentially compete later on. We'll see, but he has a lot of people are high on him, a lot of upside with this guy. And when you look at it too, they really got him like not it doesn't go against their salary cap basically at all. You're looking at about 1.5 against the cap. We can dive into the draft capital side of things, and we will get into that with Rob Staton when he comes on here. But uh you know I know you're liking the pickup, moving away from the Steelers thing, but just relating to our guy, because I think you and me were like, hey, if they bring Fields in, sure. But again, we're not in that locker room. We don't know the inner workings. And Mike McDonald and John could have been having these same conversations. Okay, let's look at who we can bring in, and do we see Justin is a long-term answer?
Well, and that's kind of the whole thing. I think, you listen to a lot of what's been said about Sam Howell, and we'll kind of touch on it here a little, but they really liked him back in his draft class. And a lot of experts did. And you look at what happened with him in Washington. Really, last year was his rookie season. He didn't play at all in his first year, except for the last game of the year, which at that point, you're not really grading the guy out on that.
Right.
Yeah, he definitely made some mistakes. I don't think Eric Bieniemy's play calling helped him at all when you're asking a young quarterback to throw the ball 620 times. Like, that's ridiculous.
Right.
So, I think it's a good change of scenery for him. And we get him for 2 years on club control, which I think is exactly what John kind of wants. And now you don't have to stress for a quarterback in this class. We may get a quarterback next year. We may get one 2 years from now. Who knows? But you've at least set yourself up in a little bit of a better financial situation with the Sam Howell thing. There is one other topic I want to talk about. Seahawk fans can rejoice because Aaron Donald retired.
Right.
We are not going to be terrorized by 99 killing our quarterbacks. Because if you really think about it, Aaron Donald kind of derailed Russell Wilson after that finger injury. Russ was never the same after that.
Yeah, Russ wasn't the same. And I think you look at the Aaron Donald situation and you say, man, this guy could have kept going. Like, this guy could have kept going for who knows how many more seasons. But a lot of people look at that and say, you know what? He got his money and he got out. He's a Hall of Famer, one of the best to ever do it. And you know what? So you look at it that standpoint, smart move by Aaron, and yeah, rejoice like crazy if you're a Seahawks fan, because not only was he a force, we've just had a tough time with the Rams. And even when we thought, say even last season, we thought, okay, there's 2 easy wins or, whatever, that just wasn't the case. And Aaron obviously has a lot to do with it. So, yeah, man, you look at that and you say, what an incredible career. Feels like it went quick because he really wasn't that old. But that's the NFL now, man. Like, you even look at the guy like remember TK came out and said it. He had like, I think he has a 10-year plan. That's when he first came in the league. Like, 10 years, I'm out. And you cannot blame a guy. You cannot blame a guy in this physical of a game.
No, you can. And I just want to say, like, Aaron Donald was a pleasure to watch. Like, we got JJ Watt and then we got Aaron Donald pretty much right after. And to me, I think Aaron Donald will go down as probably one of the most dominating defensive linemen in NFL history. Like, the amount of chaos he caused on a regular basis, game in, game out. The only other guy I would throw in that same category is Lawrence Taylor from the Giants back in the day. But like,
Wow.
just the
Yeah.
impact that Aaron Donald had, and you saw some of the photos people were posting of like, how do you remember Aaron Donald, Dad? Well, there was three guys. Like, you had to commit two guys to block one dude
Yeah.
almost every game, and there was no running backs in the step in and chip or a tight end. Like, he just blows through everybody. So for a guy to be that impactful and cause offensive coordinators that much stress with game planning, it's nice that he's out of our division and he retired, and I wish him all the best with his future endeavors. But it was fun to watch him wreak havoc for years in the NFL.
Yeah, you're right about that. So yeah, hell of a career. And like you said, we wanted to see him Sundays anymore when we play them twice a year. So um, that being said, coming up on the other side of the break, we're gonna have Rob Staton on, and we're gonna dive into the Sam Howell situation, the free agency as a whole situation, what he thinks of our new linebackers, safety, stuff that we've sort of now putting these pieces together. People were worried about. You and I talked about, hey, it's day one, day two. Hey, this isn't Christmas time when it's like, hey, we're all these big, exciting gifts and big splashes. Now we're disappointed. And it doesn't work like that. There's different strategies by different teams. We like the latter, the way John does his business and the way you don't just throw money to like a Damian Lewis out there and get all wild and crazy for some reason. So we're going to dive into all that with Rob on the other side. Hey guys, we have Rob Staton joining us again from the BBC, also Seahawks Draft Blog.com. Rob, thanks for coming on and hanging out and talking Hawks with us again. We really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime, guys. My pleasure.
So obviously, free agency started off last week, and day one of free agency is an interesting time. We don't have the history of making massive splashes at the beginning of free agency, or just in general, the big splashes. Draymond Jones last season was sort of the exception, and that's sort of, everybody's sort of raising an eyebrow, like, wow, they're throwing some money at an interior lineman there like that. Okay, let's see how this goes. This year comes around. I think there was expectations. You got this new regime. John's on his own. Everybody's like, wow, how aggressive is he going to get? And day one comes and goes, and no big splashes, right? Not to Bryce and I's surprise. We thought that's sort of how it was going to go. And then obviously some of the pieces start filling in, right? We have two linebackers now that we'll touch on, safety, and a bunch of other little moves, right? Some guys, a center, and Fant brought back in. So if you look at it just as a whole, what's your sort of overall take, and with John's free agency this year, and how he's sort of filled some of the gaps so far?
Well, I think it was a very understandable approach because you're right. There's a lot of people sort of what people tend to do at free agencies. They go and have a look at, let's say, the 100 best available free agents on PFF or NFL.com, and they kind of start at number one and go all the way down and pick the guys that they think would be quite good to fit on the team. And then some of those will be big name guys. And then what also tends to happen, and I'm guilty of this as well, is you get to sort of 55. And the blurb write-up for that player will be, this player played surprisingly well last year, and he could be somebody who is a sort of a really good value player. And then you think, oh, that sounds really good. But what you don't realize is that the whole league is also feeling the same way about that player. And those players generally go quite early, and they're quite expensive as well. So you kind of pin your hopes on several of these targets that you've put in your own mind as to who you'd like the Seahawks to go and get. And then what happens is you start seeing the tweets from Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Jordan Schultz and everybody saying they've signed for another team. And people then just overreact. Oh my God, we've not signed any of the players on my target list. And I think with reality from where the Seahawks were this year, they had to do a few things. They had to sort the cap situation out because they'd got into so many bad contracts. They were coming into this year like in the red in terms of cap space. They were having to sort of make moves to create space. You never want to be in that position. And you never want to end up like the Saints, just sort of borrowing on the credit card every year, because you never end up going anywhere. So they had to get the cap straightened out. And it seems pretty clear to me that their priority was to get Leonard Williams back. Now, whether you agree with that decision or not, whether you think that they're overcompensating for the fact that they spent a second-round pick or not, that was their priority. It wasn't Patrick Queen. It wasn't going and getting somebody else. And I think if you actually sit down and think about it, the Seahawks have not had a really good, impactful defensive tackle in a long, long time. He is not Aaron Donald. He is not Jones in Kansas City. But he is probably in the second or third tier of defensive tackles, and the Seahawks finally have somebody who can disrupt. And I think actually people have forgotten how disruptive he was in a couple of games towards the end of the year. So prioritizing him and bringing in Pap, perfectly sensible to me. And then what have they done after that? Because that's used up a lot of cap space. They've looked for value. They've looked to bring guys in to fill out their roster, to set them up to go best player available. I think it's the only thing they could have done. There's not a single player out there that I've thought, damn, I wish the Seahawks could have done that deal that another team's taken on. I am no fan at all of spending elite money for non-elite players. I like Robert Hunt. There's no way he should be on $20 million a year to pass block in Carolina. So don't go and spend money on players who are decent, that are getting contracts that are elite. They've avoided that. They've been restrained. So for me, 2 thumbs up.
No, yeah, I agree with you, Rob, and a lot of what you just said there. Like, I love the fact they went out and brought Williams back, so we actually have a impactful trench player that can actually cause some chaos in there. And like you said, I think a lot of people have forgotten a couple of those games where he was impactful. Even the 49ers game where they were in Seattle, he was pretty impactful in that game alone, which was nice. And if you watch, and this is the one thing with a lot of people, that we've seen say, they overpaid for him. When the Giants played the Niners early in the year and they actually moved him out to an end spot, he gave Trent Williams problems all game long. And having that flexibility of being able to do that, I think will be a benefit to Seattle in the long run. And like you said too, like the value stuff, like I love Jerome Baker and Dotson as 2 linebackers that you picked up. And clearly they didn't go after Patrick Queen and Jordan Brooks for reasons, whether that's Mike McDonald saying they don't fit my system and what I want to do, or whatever it is. I'm okay with that. Safety, I'm okay with the way the room is now with Jenkins in there. Like, he's a good playing safety. He's a year younger than Quandre, and there's a few podcasts out there that are, all about how can we let Quandre Diggs go? We don't have that single high guy anymore. That's not the system we're running anymore. So why do we need to have a player that doesn't produce in that way anymore? Go get a guy that's going to fit your new scheme. And I think that's the biggest thing, is so many people are so used to how Seattle used to operate with Pete Carroll and that scheme and that system. Everything's new now. So just sit there, be patient, trust the process, watch and learn what John does with this team. And I think he's set himself up for the draft in a way where we can go and attack some of the areas of need that we need to. But I still have reservations on certain things with, that he may try and over address, which one is receiver. I think they may take a receiver, which kind of worries me in the long run.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know about the receiver, because they've just invested so much there. At the minute, they don't have that much stock. They have that first rounder, and they're not going to pick again until 81. So by the time, if let's say they did take, and look, there's all sorts of things we could discuss with regards to the draft. They can move down, they can acquire more picks. That's a distinct possibility. I've got some big thoughts on that. But I think if you just look at what they have right now, if they pick once at 16 and then have to wait to 81, when they get to 81, there's going to be sort of priorities there. And unless there is a receiver who is graded so far and away higher than everybody else, I think they probably will go in a different direction. So I'm not too worried about that. I think sort of I don't really have that many concerns about it. I think sort of if there was to be one sort of negative from all of this process, is that I don't really understand how they've gone from a year ago, John Schneider saying, we were really keen to get more draft stock for next year. And that's why trading out of the 3rd round a year ago to get a 3rd rounder this year was so important to us, because we think it's a deeper draft class. And yet we sit here today and there is that huge hole between 16 and 81 that they've just made a trade. And there's this little things like their trade compensation over the years has been a little bit head scratching. There's just a little thing, like whatever you think of the Sam Howell deal, did they really have to? Could they not have just bartered down to keep 78 instead of 81? I mean, I know it's probably a thing that annoys me more than everybody else, but you have 2 third-round picks right next to each other. How has it ended up giving you the higher pick to get this done? Like, I don't know, little things like that, but they're minor things. In the grand scheme of things, they've done the right thing in free agency. I think to continue on that path would be wise. The only big sort of long-term concern with the Seahawks right now is, what is their plan at quarterback? What exactly is the plan to bring somebody in? You've had 2 years. This is the third off season since the Wilson trade. What exactly are you going to do to bring somebody in who's going to be the future, or at least can potentially be the future, because you can't guarantee success? When are you actually going to make that move? I want to see a plan for the Seahawks to do that, whatever it is, because right now it feels a little bit like they're waiting for the perfect storm to roll into town. I don't think it's ever going to happen. So eventually you're going to have to be proactive to make it happen.
Yeah, Rob, I want to touch on the couple new linebackers. Maybe we'll touch on that, though, in a sec, because you brought up quarterbacks, man. So I kind of want to dive into that, because I'm in the same sort of boat as you. It's like you make the Russ trade. Here's Geno, kind of, he was sitting there and he's been in the system. He has a pretty good season. Everyone's surprised. You roll it back, and then last year, kind of did the same thing, right? It was just, we all know what last year's like, 9-8. We know it was just going to be the same mediocrity. We keep the same regime, but then Geno's still here, and we keep rolling with Geno. And now you kind of get excited about the draft. They're really going to go after somebody for sure. And then, like you said, the trade happens with Sam Howell, and it's like I think, I know you sort of have thoughts on, it doesn't mean they're not going to go after a guy in the draft, but now it kind of feels like maybe we don't have to go get a guy. Maybe the perfect guy is not there, like you're saying, and we can roll Geno again and Sam, and it's this transition year with Mike McDonald, and just get him comfortable. But at the end of the day, you got to get somebody where you can say, this is our franchise guy. We could see this guy being the guy for the next 8-9 seasons, and right now I don't know where it is. So what are your thoughts, I guess, with the trade, and yeah, overall, like what is the plan? Are they getting someone in the draft, or can you see him sort of maybe now bypassing it altogether and I don't know, coming up with a new plan?
Well, whenever you talk about anything like this, you've got to be really balanced about it. You've got to sort of think of all the different angles that the Seahawks are going to consider, because look, it'd be very easy for me to say, look, I want them to go out there and I want them to go and find a guy. But you've got to look at the situation. So I think first and foremost, I think they went into this offseason very open to trading Geno Smith. I think that's why they were non-committal before the combine, both the coach and the GM. And then I think they found that there simply wasn't a market there, or a market that they were comfortable trading Geno Smith away. I think that's why they were talking up Drew Lock, because I think initially their intention possibly was to move Geno on, to bring back Drew Lock, and Drew Lock be the starter. So no market for Geno. Drew Lock decides, I'm not interested in coming back and just being your backup quarterback and not having a chance to start. I'm going to go to the New York Giants instead. So then they look at this situation and they've decided to work out a trade for a backup who, look, Sam Howell's not going to be the worst backup in the NFL. There's going to be a lot worse backup quarterbacks than Sam Howell in the NFL next season. So they've made a deal to bring somebody in to back him up. What does it mean for the draft? I think they'd have been very open to trading up, and I just don't think they can do it. The consensus around the NFL, whether, again, we agree or not, seems to be that there's a class of 4 quarterbacks who are at the top, which is obviously Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and JJ McCarthy. They seem to be a consensus 4 within this league. Now, if the top 3 teams are going to take a quarterback and don't want to move off because they need a quarterback and they're not interested in trading down, and if the Minnesota Vikings then do a deal, which the Seahawks and everybody in the league will have known about, because the Vikings didn't just ring the Texans up and go, hey, do you want to do a deal so that we can get a second first-round pick? They'll have probably rung Seattle. They'll have rung Jacksonville behind them. They'll have rung the LA Rams at 19. They'll have rung the Steelers at 20. Everybody will have known that the Vikings were trying to get back into the first round for a second pick. So everybody will have known about that. So I think they've looked at it and thought, right, there's one spot we could possibly trade up for. It's number 4. It's Arizona, who are in our division and might not be inclined to trade with us. And now the Vikings have 2 first-round picks that they can use to move up. We can't get at the top 4 quarterbacks. So that avenue is shut off to us. So now you look at what can you do instead? You have number 16 and 81. You don't have a second round pick. If their grade of Michael Penix is round 2, and if their grade of Bo Nix is round 2, and pick a round for Spencer Rattler, because I think round 2, but others think round 4. But let's just say he's in that sort of range as well. You don't have a pick in the second round right now. So unless you do trade down, which is no guarantee, you stand a real possibility of coming out of that draft with no quarterback again. And then what do you do with only Geno Smith on the roster? Who's going to be out there in mid-May, June, who you could bring in to be a backup? So they probably felt we need to do something now to cover our backs against the draft. Because as we sit here today, it looks really hard for them to get a quarterback. Now, they may move down from 16. They may get a second round pick. That might enable them to take Penix. And they might be very open to doing that. But even then, they might get a second round pick and decide that other player's graded higher, that we're going to take him instead of Penix. There's no guarantee they're going to get a quarterback. So they've covered themselves. So I think the process is understandable. I'm not a big Howell fan. I wish they had not given up as much as they have to do him. I would have been open-minded to maybe doing other deals that are cheaper to avoid losing 78 and having to go down to 102. But I understand the process. But my sort of the bigger picture point is, eventually, like Minnesota, you are going to have to consider, how do you get around the fact that it's tricky to acquire a quarterback unless you're picking in the top 5? And they've got to, they might have to make a bold trade. They might have to take a chance on somebody in the first round. You can't keep waiting every single year for the next Mahomes or Allen to fall into your lap. You are going to have to look at a class and you're going to have to go, okay, that guy's got the intangible and physical qualities that make him a potential franchise quarterback. There's no guarantee, and it might not work. But we've got to take a chance, because if they keep kicking the can down the road, they're just going to be stuck at 9 and 8. You can't just keep rolling Geno Smith out. Geno Smith is going to have good patches in a season and bad patches in a season. It is what it is. Sam Howell is not going to be the franchise answer for the Seahawks. Even John Schneider's not. He's not even saying he's competing for the job. He's saying he's a backup. So eventually, you've got to go and find somebody who can lead this team beyond 8, 9, 10 wins and get you up to 13 wins and playoff contention and going that way. So if it ain't this year, they better start coming up with a plan to make it a reality next year, because they can't just woe is us every single season. We can't make this happen. Eventually, you've got to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, Rob. They need to get an impact quarterback, a guy that can actually win you games and be the reason you win the game, not just a part of the reason why you win the game. And for me, I look at the Howell trade. I liked Howell when he was coming out. I thought, you know what, this wouldn't be a bad guy to bring in as a developmental prospect where you're going to develop him for a year or two or whatever. And I still think quarterback could be on the board for Seattle, but it has to be, like you said, in that right spot. They're not going to, like you said, if they're on their big board and they go, hey, this guy's rated above him by 1, we're going to take that guy over Penix or Bo Nix or whatever, they're going to do it. But like you said, there needs to be a plan. They need to do something, and it can't be, okay, cool, we're going to sit here with our hands on, or we're going to try and trade for somebody. You're not going to trade for a franchise quarterback unless you're going to give up the farm. But usually when you're trading for that guy, he's in his late to mid 30s. He's not going to be a young quarterback on his, second deal. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I would like to see Penix. I think that's the most reasonable outcome now, based on what you said. You're not getting up into the top 4 to get JJ McCarthy or one of those guys. But I wouldn't touch Penix until the second round. So, and at that point, you got to also hope wherever you trade down from out of 16, if you can, and you get that first and second, that second somewhere where you're not sitting behind maybe a team that passed on a quarterback that now wants to go get one. Atlanta still could be in play for a quarterback in the second or third round, because they're going to need somebody behind Kirk Cousins in a couple of years.
I think you're right. I agree with you. I think the Seahawks will like Penix, but I think they'll see him as a day 2 pick. And they don't currently have a second round pick. So you have to plan you're not going to be able to get him. And then it comes down to what trade offers. Listen, Green Bay may say, we want to go and get a left tackle. The Green Bay Packers need a left tackle. They may well say, we need to go and get a left tackle. The Tennessee Titans might take, I know everyone's saying they're going to take a tackle in the top 10. Listen, they may well take Roma Dunze. People need to go and listen to what Brian Callahan was saying when he was with the Bengals. He says the future of the league is about quarterbacks and receivers. Like, he's a big receiver guy. He may, if he gets Malik Neighbors or Roma Dunze at number 7, I think he'll take him, and then he'll trust his dad to develop an offensive lineman, a left tackle. They might trade back into the first round to go and get their tackle. They might take one in round 2. So there's going to be teams that want to move up and get tackles. So you might get a really attractive offer where the Packers have got 2 second-round picks. They might chuck you 58 or whatever it is to go and move up. And then you've got 58. Is Pickett's going to last to 58 though? Like, that's the other thing. Like, if you're not picking in the 40s, like, is he going to be there? If you're not picking at 50, is he still going to be there? So you've got to sort of prepare for the eventuality that you won't be able to draft him. So I think that's what it comes down to. And I do think with their sort of number one priority, I think you can overthink this sometimes. And I'm guilty of that as well. But I kind of thought about it today and I was like, look, if their approach is best player available in this draft, what's the strength of the draft? It's offensive tackle. So I think that's going to be their primary focus. I think they're going to draft if they stay at 16, they're going to draft. I think they'll look Fuaga and Fatanu. I keep mixing the two names together. I think they're going to be like 1A and 1B for them. And I don't think either of them are going to last to 16. But if they do, I think they might just stick and pick. And then you've got like Mims and Guyton and people like that they might be interested in. You draft one of those tackles, you feel very good about it, and then you kick Abe Lucas inside, which is what Washington did with Jackson Kirkland. When he had knee injuries, they moved him inside to guard. So they might look at moving Lucas inside. They might feel that they can get through some of these knee problems with him at left guard as opposed to tackle. You draft a right tackle. But if they do that, you ain't trading down, you ain't getting that second round pick, and you can forget about Michael Penix. So that's why I think they've traded for Sam Howell.
Yeah, hey, sticking on the quarterback situation, Rob. News out of obviously Pittsburgh a few days back that Russ comes in and he signs a 1-year deal with them, right? And the Steelers get a bargain there with Denver paying majority of the salary there. So you thinking that Pittsburgh doesn't need a QB anymore? And then they signed Justin Fields. Justin Fields was the guy that Bryce and I were talking about where maybe that's a potential home here in Seattle. Kind of bring him in for the year. I know he's got that 5th-year option, and then you gotta possibly pay the guy. Was that a guy ever on your board, or a guy that you ever thought, hey, this could be a good fit? Were the Seahawks even serious about bringing this guy in and kind of thinking this could be a guy for the future for them at QB?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I was never a fan of Justin Fields going into his draft. I never really enjoyed watching him play. I think as a passer, he's really limited. I think you could see, I mean, we talked about it a lot in the pre-draft on the blog and stuff we did, that he looked like a turnover machine. His throwing technique, when he was getting sacked, there was a lot of fumbles. That's carried on into the league. As a passer, he's more of a chucker than I think an actual precision thrower. It's led to a lot of interceptions. I think he telegraphs a lot of his throws. His release is so late. So I was never a fan of his. Obviously a great athlete. So it wasn't anybody that I ever pined for. I mean, look, there's been guys on Twitter constantly sending me tweets every day saying, just go and trade for Justin Fields. Like, he can be the franchise quarterback. And I was like, he's just not that good. And Curtis, who writes my blog, has done a very good job of sort of writing all of the turnovers he's had, and it's unbelievable. However, I gave a 4th-round grade to Sam Howell on my board when I was doing the horizontal board for that draft. He threw 21 interceptions last year. Yes, there are circumstances that led to that at Washington, but at the same time, he took too many sacks, too many interceptions. The pass block percentage, win percentage was not that bad in Washington, so you can't blame it all on the offensive line. I wasn't really that interested in either of them. But if you were saying, like, look, throwaway pick for a cheap backup quarterback, yeah, why not? And the fact that Fields is a little bit cheaper than Howell makes you think, would you have rather have done that instead? I think the reason why there's a bit of a difference there is because you essentially the Steelers have got Fields for 1 year. They ain't going to pick up the 5th-year option, because if you'd have to pick that up before the season begins. You have to do that in the next few weeks. So they're not going to commit $21 million to Justin Fields. They're going to see how this goes. And then what I think their plan is that see who wins the job, see who finishes the season in control and in their minds playing winning football for Pittsburgh, and then they'll reassess in the offseason. And if Fields has won the job and is doing well, re-sign him. Russell Wilson's doing well, re-sign him. If neither of them are doing well, you go in a completely different direction. So Pittsburgh have done a very good job, in my opinion, of just setting themselves up with options. Their QB situation is as murky, if not murkier than Seattle's. But I kind of, if I was a Steelers fan right now, I'd be excited and intrigued. As a Seahawks fan, I kind of just think, because listen, it's nothing against Geno Smith. I'm just not excited watching Geno Smith. And I'm bored of the toxicity of the arguments made for and against him. He's a fine, okay quarterback who plays well some of the time and badly other parts of the time. He's been quite high on turnover-worthy plays, and there are some other analytical statistics that show that he's been quite good in Seattle. But he ain't taking you to the promised land. I suspect Russell Wilson and Justin Fields aren't taking Pittsburgh to the promised land. But it just feels a little bit different for the Steelers. And from Seattle's point of view, I crave the excitement of 2012, which was, which way is this going to go? Who's going to win the job? What's the future hold? At the minute, I kind of feel like we're just waiting to have that experience again, and I hope it arrives soon.
Yeah, I agree with you with the Pittsburgh statement. Exactly. Like you had a Kenny Pickett. You sort of, I mean, maybe you didn't know exactly where the ceiling was, but it was limited, right? So you get in now, you got two guys basically competing, like the veteran who, hey, get him out of Denver, needs a complete change. And, with their running game and their defense, he looks at that like, hey, I can be successful here. Maybe things turn around. If not, like you said, Justin Fields is there. If none of them, hey, let them walk out the door and move on. But yeah, like you said, in Seattle, same thing for me, man. Like it's just, oh man, it almost feels sort of stagnant-ish where you're like, hey, you have Geno, you have Sam as a backup, you could be Drew Lock, whatever. Where's this next guy that's coming in? And that's why we hope we do get somebody. I mean, like, I know you're a Spencer Rattler guy. I know he's a later day 2, day 3 guy, whatever, but even having a guy like that where you're like, which way could this go? Maybe this guy could just shine at camp and just something, because as it is right now, yeah, I'm excited about the new regime and Mike McDonald and everybody else and some of the defensive guys. But at that position, it's sort of like there's just, not a lot of excitement right now for me either.
Just, you've got to find the difference-making traits and take a chance.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that for me. You can't look for flawless. You've got to look for players who have got a bit of something that you can imagine, okay, that trait separates them from the rest. So when you look at Josh Allen, his tape at Wyoming stank, but you could see there was this 6'5", 240-pound monster who could run around, throw the ball 80 yards, and then when he went to the Senior Bowl and stuff, that a heaven-sent arm, and you thought, okay, this guy's going to need a ton of work. And Josh Allen was a meme for the first 2 years in the NFL. And then look what he's become. Yeah. And then you look at Lamar Jackson. He has had a funny off season, and his mum's like the agent, and that's a nightmare. And he's not meeting with teams, and he's not running at the pro day or doing anything at the pro. Yeah, disastrous off season for him. Played into the hands of Baltimore. But when you watch Lamar Jackson on tape, he had sort of the aspects of Michael Vick, but he was a better passer. Like his technique was good. He could launch the ball downfield. He threw one of the best passes I've ever seen in college football when he was at Louisville. 50 yards on a dime downfield under pressure, about to get hit in the face. He could also scramble around, X factor as a runner. Difference-making skills. Was he flawless? No, because if he was flawless, he'd have been number 1 overall, given everything else. But he had a lot of what you wanted as a player. Patrick Mahomes could scramble around. We all know what Patrick Mahomes does. Huge rocket arm. Daniel Jeremiah doesn't have him in his top 50 a month before the draft because he's flawed. But the Kansas City Chiefs are like, we're going to trade up and take that guy. We're going to take a risk. But then there's other players like Denver traded up for Paxton Lynch. They saw some difference-making traits, the size, the way they elevated Memphis. He was a complete bust. Like, those things can happen as well. Trey Lance, the Niners thought we're going up for difference-making traits. I thought Trey Lance was awful, but, the Niners thought there was difference-making traits there, and they went up and got it. Sometimes you've just got to go and find that guy. This is kind of a little bit why I like Will Levis, a year ago, is because, okay, there were sort of flaws within his game and things spiraled a bit at Kentucky that hampered him. And look, I get why teams were put off with the obsession with the weight room and all of that stuff that was with him. You kind of want him to be more agile than jacked. But he could throw the ball. He made some incredible throws. He made things look very easy that are very difficult. And the Tennessee Titans are now going to put weapons around him and see if they found like a Lamar Jackson type at the, in the 30s. And the Seahawks have got to try and find that difference-making trait within one of these quarterbacks, and they've got to take a chance on them. And they've drafted 2 quarterbacks since 2010, since John came in. And I don't think they've done a good enough job in that time, just finding the traits in the various different tiers during a draft and just bringing them in. And I think Spencer Rattler's a good example of that. He's got a great arm. You know, he's like a mini Mahomes to a lot of it. Look, is he flawed? Yes. Is he perfect? No. But there's a lot of those aspects there. But there's the same about Michael Penix, fantastic arm that he has. You know, I don't think there's difference-making traits with Bo Nix. I don't think there's difference-making traits with JJ McCarthy, unless you want to call intangibles a trait. So, you know, I think this is the way that you've got to view it now, and I hope that they start to do that.
This is my last point on the 2024 quarterback class is I really wish and wonder how different the evaluation would have gone if Quinn Ewers would have come out. If he had come out for John Schneider and Seattle, like I was super high on Quinn Ewers. I have been since day one with that kid, ever since he came out of high school. And to me, he screams, like you just said, yes, he has some flaws, but his intangibles and his things that make him special and different, they're exactly what you even listen to John talk about Sam Howell. Big arm, smart, tough. Like you look at that game against Washington this past year in the playoff, he got smacked around, but he's still standing in there throwing dimes. Like he, for me, next year, if they're going to trade up and go get somebody, that is who you circle at the top of your board and say, we do not leave this draft without that kid.
I'm trying to find the tweet because I was watching Alabama against Texas, and
he was phenomenal in that game.
Yeah, and I was watching that live, and Lance Zierlein, who you know I've got to know a little bit over the years, tweeted something out about Ewers, and I'm trying to find it because he was talking about his arm. I'm really struggling. I've sent him so many tweets over the years; it's really hard to search for the tweet. But basically, what he was saying is he made a throw where it was a flick of the wrist from midfield, and the ball, it had the trajectory, you know, sort of that loft on the pass, but the pass never died at any point. Like it went high and it was firm and there was velocity on that throw and the torque, and it landed right in the hands of the receiver running underneath it. You know, it was an unbelievable throw, and it's something that I don't think people realize Ewers has in his bag. And there are if you just have to watch, like a lot of people came out of that Washington game saying that Ewers he wasn't that impressive or stuff like that, or that Penix was better. And I was like, yeah, Penix was better in that game. But if you actually just watch Ewers, the video's on YouTube, every throw that Ewers had in that Washington game. If you just watch every single throw from that game, you'll come away with a very different impression of Quinn Ewers than if you sat sort of watching it thinking, Texas has been a bit underwhelming here. And I think Ewers got caught up in that a little bit. But he's very talented. And there's a number of times on tape where he's about to get bastard, and his release is so quick. He does throw layered passes. He throws a great anticipation. This is something that people don't look for, you know, whether they're throwing to receivers before they even turn into their break and the ball's there for them when they get there. You have to do that in the NFL. I think that's what Ewers does. Does he make bad decisions? Yes. That's why he's gone back to Texas, because he wants to clean up some of those things with the objective of being a top 5 pick next year. And I think you're right. I think this would be, if Ewers was in this draft, I think the Seahawks would be going, we need to get aggressive now. We need to try and find a way to come out of this class with a quarterback, potentially with him in mind. I mean, look, John name dropped Quinn Ewers after the draft a year ago when he was talking about Jack Smith and Jigba. And his personality, he's very religious like John. I can see them sort of connecting in a way if they spoke before the draft. I think he is somebody who will be very much on their radar. The problem is if he has the kind of season that we all think he might have next year, he could be the number 1 overall pick, or he could be a top 5 pick. And then what do?
So
you're back at square one.
Here's my point with that. And this is something I look at in the history of Seattle. And John, you think of how many first-round picks we have burned. And I talked with Orion about this. Jimmy Graham, Percy Harvin, where we've traded a future first-round, Jamal Adams. But you're telling me we're going to trade a future first-round pick for potentially our franchise quarterback for the next 10 years? Like you're saying, if we had to trade up to go get Ewers and get in the top 3, but you're going to put 2 first-round picks down and a second and a third, but that's my potential outcome as a Seahawks fan. That to me is more justified than, hey, here's 2 first-round picks for a box safety that isn't going to have the same impact as a franchise quarterback that could basically set us up for the next 10, 15 years like Kansas City. You can't name who the safeties are in Kansas City, but Patrick Mahomes is taking snaps. So we know that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to constantly be in the conversation as one of the top contending teams in the NFL just because he's there.
And also, look at the teams who've traded up and have failed, because people love to mention RG3 and Trey Lance and people like that. None of those franchises were destroyed by those trades. It was a setback. It was a setback in as much as the Jamal Adams trade was a setback. Like if you whiff on a quarterback after trading up, it's not the end of the world. You work around it. Like you took a chance on trying to find a guy that could lead you to greatness. If that doesn't work, you just pivot and go and get the guy who can go and find somebody else, go and find another way to go and get that guy. There's absolutely no reason to fear going up and getting a quarterback. So, I think it should be done eventually. If the guy's not going to be there for you, you should definitely do it. I think some people are risk averse in a way they needn't be at that position, because like you say, I didn't see a lot of complaints after the Jamal Adams trade. I mean, I hated it from day one. People were celebrating that for a box safety. I get the sense that if it was announced tomorrow that the Seahawks moved up to like number 3, that half the fan base would be going, yeah, great, amazing, Drake May or JJ McCarthy, and half the fan base would be going, what are we doing? It's a disaster. Look at Trey Lance. And it's like, you've got to take a risk. And if I was a billionaire owner of an NFL team, I'd be saying to my GM, we need a quarterback. Feel free to take a risk. I am not going to judge you and your job on risking to get a great quarterback. Be empowered to do that. Because the only way you break out of the doldrums of this middle ground is to get a special quarterback. Don't give me this. Look at the Niners. The Niners drafted their team well for like 8 years and then made 2 of the most inspired trades you will ever find in Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams. Good luck trying to emulate that. And you don't have Kyle Shanahan, who can just basically coach any of us 3 to be a quarterback in his system. Like, you don't have those benefits. The only way the Seahawks are going to get back to the top is by eventually finding somebody who can win you a game under center, who can go out there and lead you against these top teams. So you've got to go and get that done. Otherwise, we're just going to be having the same conversation every year. Which offensive lineman are they going to take? Which defensive lineman are they going to take? Which linebacker are they going to sign in free agency? It's all peripheral compared to the big question. Who's the future of the franchise at quarterback? That's the big question for the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you bring up, you bring up the Niners and all that, but it's funny because a lot of Hawks fans, or a lot of people you hear, like they bring up Geno, all the comebacks he's had, and all and that's, I appreciate that, but it's like, again, it's just such a meaningless stat when we're really, Bryce and I are saying, hey, with this new regime, this is sort of a building block year for us, right? 2024. Hey, if we go on a hot run and win games, well, that's the ultimate goal, but we're looking to set it up for 25, 26, and Geno is just not the long-term plan. And I agree, you got to take risks. So when I look at it, and I guess the question to you, just kind of my final thought on the QB thing, is that kind of a risky guy, and I know you really like him. Would if you're the GM, would you then try to sort of wait for that day 2-ish area, depending what they do? Obviously, like you said, they might trade down, do all this crazy stuff. Would you like to see Rattler in a Hawks uniform and just bring him in and see how he does at camp and compete, and sort of, a smaller kind of guy with some fire and big play potential? And would that sort of get you excited as a Seahawks fan?
Well, look, he's got a lot of talent. Like, he's got a lot of natural talent. Like, you just have to look at. This is how sad I am. I've watched footage of him in high school throwing. It's almost like it's behind the quarterback. So it's akin to all 22 footage of him practicing at high school, and the ball flies out of his hand in a way you just do not see with many quarterbacks. And that was when he was like, what, 17 years old, something like that. So there's a natural talent with Spencer Rattler. And then, look, if he'd have played for Kalen DeBoer, he wouldn't have been sacked 100 times last year. He would have had 3 top receivers to throw to. It would have been a totally different environment than getting absolutely hammered every week behind one of the worst offensive lines in college football with only Xavier Legette to throw to. Like that, and you're in the SEC. You're not playing, with the greatest respect, some of the teams you have to play in the Pac-12. So it was a very difficult for him. You can see things that he does very well: throwing on the run, getting out of the pocket, layered throws. good in the red zone, can make a first down with his legs. You know, he is someone who is, I think, in pure talent, is very impressive. Some of the downsides for him, he's not the biggest guy. He's not got prototypical size. And you have to do a deep character study on him. Now, I think you have to respect that he has matured greatly at South Carolina. It's obvious. Just have to listen to the guy and listen to the coaches and teammates talk about it. It's obvious. But at the same time, you can't just assume, okay, like when the player's career was on the line, he's matured. If he makes it to the NFL, does he resort back to old habits? That's what why you've got to do the character study. I'm very aware of some of the things that teams will ask Spencer Rattler about at Oklahoma. They're not terrible things. They're not things that make you want to go run a mile from him. They're just things that make you want to go, why did you do that? And these are the things that teams are going to have to ask him about. How he answers those questions will determine whether or not you're prepared to take him and potentially develop him to be a franchise quarterback. I can't answer the questions that teams will be able to answer because I can't sit down with him and do a proper, serious NFL interview. So I find it really hard to say whether I would be thoroughly excited by it or not. But the talent is there. He is a very interesting player. The league, I don't know how many more people have to say it. Like Jim Nagy says it all the time. The league is higher on him than people understand. Bob McGinn, I don't know if you're aware of Bob McGinn. He used to write for the Journal Sentinel in Wisconsin. He does a draft series every single year. He speaks to scouting sources. He's just published his sort of introductory version for this year on the Go Long subscription site. And I subscribe to that so I can read what Bob McGinn's scout sources say. And one of them said something like, I don't mind, I think it was JJ McCarthy. I don't mind Bo Nix, but I prefer Spencer Rattler to both of them. So there are people in the league who feel very highly about Spencer Rattler more than the media. So I think he's going to go in the second round. I think he'd be a perfect quarterback. I hate to say it, for the Rams. I could see the Raiders taking an interest in him. I think the Rams would be perfect for him, by the way, and him for them. But that's, it begs the question, if he's perfect for the Rams, should you be taking him? And then the other thing you've got to think of here is the system. Like, we're getting to learn with the new systems in Seattle. We're listening to people who know Ryan Grubb very well on that offense in Washington. They want to throw the ball to every blade of grass on the field. Can Rattler do that? Yes. Has he got an arm of the quality of Penix? No. But he does have a big arm. So I think he can potentially do that. But I just get the sense that the Seahawks are looking for that, in an ideal world, big, 6'4", 230, 240, sort of mobile, but could chuck a ball downfield as far as it goes. I do sense they're going to get that. Can I just say one thing, though, as well? I'm sorry that I'm rambling on here. Geno Smith's comebacks, that gets brought up a lot. Who are they against?
Yeah,
that's the comeback. So he managed to squeeze out a win against the Panthers. They were the number 1 overall pick this year. They've given it to the Bears. The Cardinals at home, they weren't very good. They're picking 4th overall. The Browns. The Seahawks offense was an abomination in the second half. They basically barely had a yard, and they won the game because Jamal Adams headed a football into the air, and it was picked off, and they basically had a 30-yard drive to win it at the end. It was one of the flukiest wins in the NFL season. They beat the Commanders, who were just about to start an epic run of uselessness, and he beat them 29-26. He then didn't play against the Eagles, and Drew Lock had a comeback win against the Eagles. So Drew Lock, in his one key start, also had a comeback. And then he led comebacks against the Titans, awful, and the Cardinals, who threw the game away because their kicker missed 2 kicks at the end. These were not amazing comebacks. Context is important. The only seriously good late win that he had all year was against the Lions. And for whatever reason, the Seahawks seem to have the Lions number under Geno and under Pete Carroll. I don't understand why that is, but it is true. That was the only one. And people keep bringing it up. And I'm thinking, when you actually dig through it, the Seahawks just won a lot of games they should have won handsomely in a close way that was not necessary.
And just to touch a little bit, and not to, on Geno and his performance, but you look back at that Commanders game that he did come back and win. Statistically, him and Sam Howell were almost the exact same quarterback. If not, Howell made more big-time throws in that game with less weapons. Like, so when people rave about Geno, to me, it's like, I don't see how if we plug Sam Howell in, we're similar and still the same team. Like, he's going to make big time throws. He's going to make mistakes. Geno does the same thing. And for me, I look at Geno and I say, he's really had one good year in Seattle and one bad year. He's had a great start one year and a shitty second half, and a bad first half and a good second half. Like, he's never put a full season together where I went, wow, from start to finish, Geno, you were on point. And I get you're going to have games in there where it's kind of not the greatest, but like, he's had severe drop offs and just going down and not being an effective quarterback. So to end it all, I agree with you, Rob. They need to make a decision on the quarterback situation. But I do have a question for you in regards to the draft. What are your views on the linebacker class this year in the draft? Because a lot of people say it's horrible and it's just not very good. And you have other people that are saying, yeah, there may not be a lot of blue chips, but there's still starting caliber linebackers in that class.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that I always have with people who I don't know everything about the draft. I don't have all of the answers. I get stuff wrong all of the time. But there are people out there who know nothing about the draft. They just hear people say things like it's a bad class at linebacker, and they just regurgitate those views, and then it becomes mainstream thought. When I've spoken to people who are in the league and I've said to them, is it a bad draft at linebacker, let's say, the response I always get is, no. It's never a bad draft. It's just there are good players at every position. It's just that you might not have great players in the first round. You might not have 10 players at that position who are going to go in day two. But what you will always have good players. It's just you've got to find who the good players are within the class. And when you look at sort of linebacker and safety that people have been going, oh, there's no good players there. I do think there are good players. So, you could easily make a case that you've got to check the medicals on Peyton Wilson, but he's a very interesting player. He's full-blooded, gets around the field. There's a lot of the things that he could be, there are some similarities to his style of play to Luke Kuechly. Now, he isn't Luke Kuechly, and he doesn't have Luke Kuechly's size, and he isn't going to be Kuechly, but there's sort of little aspects of him that you see there. But he's got a deep injury history. So you have to sort of balance out how early you want to take him because of that. Edgerrin Cooper, is going to overrun some plays. He's going to miss a few tackles. He's also going to be very explosive and get around the field and get into the backfield. Junior Colson's getting a little bit overrated by Seahawks fans. I think it's just because he used to play for Michigan. But he's a safe, steady pair of hands. He's a very solid, physical linebacker. He wasn't as big at the combine as I think people have thought. He was like 235, something like that, rather than 245. I think he's a decent player. And then you sort of go through it. Trevor Wallace is underrated from Kentucky. Very violent, very quick, dynamic linebacker who could be available, I'd guess, late round 2, round 3 range. Cedric Gray at North Carolina, I think, has got a lot of value for sort of that middle round range. And then what you're going to find is, I think on day 3, there is a whole bunch of linebackers who, at the very least, are going to give you absolutely everything as like core special teamers. Your Tatum Bethunes, your Tommy Eichenbergs, your Steel Chambers, Jalen Ford, people like that you can bring in that can be backups, special teamers, or could develop into role players. The league is full of linebackers who were undrafted or drafted later on who have been coached up to play solidly at the position. So I think you have a lot of players like that. So look, they've signed 2 linebackers. I think there's every chance they could get somebody else. I noticed that Tyrese Knight at UTEP is going in for an official 30 visit. I watched him on Friday, I think it was, after seeing that news, and I've got him in round 4. I think he could be available round 5. So, there are definitely players you could bring in who I think could do a job for you. I've got a lot of players on my board at that position. I'm not worried at all. I think they will be able to get a good linebacker, maybe 2, without needing to spend a first or second round pick to get one. And I feel even more positive about the safety class. I think there's a lot of safeties in this draft who are very interesting.
Yeah, speaking of going back to linebackers, when you mentioned context, when we talked about Geno and the comebacks, you look at the 2 guys we had last year, and Bobby and Jordan, and guys bring up tackles, right? We discuss this, like Bobby Wagner still leading the league in tackles or whatever it is, but we also knew that he shouldn't have really been on the field on third downs, right? So just that's a huge thing, and so they're both out the door for reasons. Brooks, we were like, well, we could sort of take him or leave him. We weren't high on him, but we would understand, especially Bobby walking out the door. You kind of keep another guy in, and then obviously we thought Patrick Queen could have been a potential, but again, you'd have to put out a lot of money. So since both those guys are out the door, we talking about possibly drafting a guy. What are your thoughts of Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson so far? That obviously they're a little cheaper, but just their overall play and how they're potentially going to fit here in Seattle. Do you like the moves?
Yes, like the moves a lot. Jerome Baker, I actually watched a bit of him yesterday. I didn't know a great deal about how he'd gone on in Miami, but I spoke to someone who used to work with at the BBC, who's a huge Miami Dolphins fan and is very, very educated in terms of NFL. And he spoke very highly of Jerome Baker. And look, I don't think you are going to get somebody who is going to be a major impact player every single week, but you're going to get somebody who's going to be good in coverage, who's going to do all the basics that you need, who's going to be very steady, very consistent. And, that to me was the ceiling for Jordan Brooks anyway, was to be sort of steady and consistent. I don't think he is a spectacular player. I think some sections of the Seahawks fandom have kind of overrated Jordan Brooks and have gone a bit over the top in talking about him. I always thought he just came across to me like a decent player. And I think Jerome Baker comes across as a decent player. So I'm very happy with that move. In terms of Dodson, to me, it's a bit of a shot to nothing. They've not released his salary yet, so we don't know how much he's costing. But he's somebody who came into the Buffalo team last season, seemed to do a really good job. PFF certainly think he did a good enough job because he was their number one ranked linebacker. And you just sort of see how he gets on and see how he fits in. I think people have kind of got caught up a little bit on the Roquan Smith's impact in Baltimore. Like, there's no doubt that he had a big impact and it was huge for McDonald and it maybe helped elevate Patrick Queen. But I just don't, I'm not having that, like one good linebacker was the key to everything that worked in Baltimore. I think it was their willingness to adapt to opponents. It was their desire to put their sort of game winners in a position to win games for them, whether that was Kyle Hamilton, whether that was Justin Madubuike, whether it was those two edge rushers, and the ability to combine your talented difference makers just winning a rep 1v1 with manufacturing pressures and impact plays schematically. And because McDonald and Baltimore were very good at that, the whole thing came together. It also helped that the offense put the defense in a position where they were barely ever trailing in a game and could pin their ears back. But I don't think that Roquan Smith was the be-all and end-all. He's a very good linebacker, and that's fine. I don't think the Seahawks need Roquan Smith to make this work. So you get a couple of guys in here, draft somebody for some competition and some depth. You judge the situation in a year's time. I'm delighted to see that they have shifted resort. I've been banging on about this for years. There'll be certain people who listen to my stuff or read my blog who will think, God, Rob's just going on about this all the time. Shifting resource from safety and linebacker to the trenches. They've finally done it. They paid Leonard Williams a real high amount. Then they go and shift that money from safety and linebacker to do so. So again, 2 thumbs up from me. I like the moves. I've got no complaints about it at all.
So with that being said, Robin, in this draft, in the first, let's say they're Seattle's first 4 picks, so their first round, third, and 2 fours. You mentioned offensive tackle being a situation, and obviously George Fant getting signed back. There seems to be, at least from what I'm reading in the tea leaves, there seems to be some legitimate concern about Abe Lucas's health with his knee. Because, you listen to John Schneider on a show, oh, George is here to be our swing tackle. Well, that's fine and dandy, but I don't know. I get concerned that Abe Lucas may have more issues there than what's being led on even. And, you said move him to guard. So do you think that maybe that's something that Seattle prioritizes, say, over edge rusher in this draft as an offensive tackle to possibly get that settled and squared away in case Abe Lucas has to retire due to injuries or fall apart?
I think the state of the roster currently suggests that's very likely, just because they've re-signed Darrell Taylor. There's no commitment to Taylor; they could cut him, and it would cost them, I think, 20 grand. So it's not as if they're tied to him for this year. But at the minute, they've obviously paid Uchenna Nwosu. They've spent 2nd-round picks on Maffei and Derek Hall, and they've retained Darrell Taylor. So they have 4 edge rushers who they might be able to work with, and then down the line, Could someone like Kyle Van Noy come in on a cheap contract who did a good job for Baltimore? That could be a possibility if they wanted a bit of extra depth there down towards camp time. And then you look at the offensive line situation. Look, I'd heard a little bit like initially they were quite encouraged by the Lucas situation, and then maybe slightly discouraged. I think I like the thought that somebody else mentioned to me about Jackson Kirkland, because his health was a real issue. Like, he was meant to be a high draft pick. He was like a really highly rated player. Because of the injuries, and I think he had slightly different injuries. I want to say like a back problem or something like that. They moved him into guard, and he sort of saw out his time at Washington. And I wonder a little bit whether the Seahawks will do the same thing. With Lucas, the knee might never be able to pass protect as well as he did as a rookie at right tackle, but you move him into guard, and maybe some of that physicality and that tone setting that he played with, you can cover that. Schneider called Fant a utility player, which to me means he could possibly play guard himself if that doesn't work out, or he can play right tackle. I think and again, it's very easy to overthink things. You're like, what is the strength of the draft? As I said earlier, it's offensive tackle. You draft a right tackle. That's what the strength is. It's not left tackle, it's right tackle in this draft. You plug them in there, and then you work out everything else. And I think, look, there's so many guards and interior offensive linemen in this draft. It would not surprise me that what I'm not suggesting that Lucas is the clear starter at left guard. They could draft a right tackle, then go and draft a guard, round 3, round 4. I mean, John Schneider said guards are overpaid and overdrafted on the radio last week. Yeah. So that would suggest that he is going to draft a tackle, maybe be open to Lucas going inside, and then I'll go and get a guard in round 3 or round 4, round 5. And as with the linebackers, I've got a long list of players that in that kind of range, you could well imagine them becoming NFL starters. Everyone wanted Jonah Jackson in free agency, who got like 17 million. Jonah Jackson was a 3rd-round pick. Robert Hunt was a 2nd-round pick. The guy who went from Baltimore to the Jets was a 3rd or 4th round pick. So, you can get starting guards in this kind of range. The Seahawks have kind of got to find their own version of that. And then Scott Huff's got to coach them up. And I've got a lot more faith in Scott Huff doing that than any of the offensive line coaches they've had in the last few years.
What do you mean, Rob? You listen to everybody. We should have kept Damian Lewis for that $53 million,
Oh.
I
Listen,
can't believe Carolina paid that for him.
Listen, I like Damian because I interviewed Damian Lewis before the draft and really enjoyed chatting to him, and he had a great rookie year, and I think the Seahawks destroyed his time in Seattle. To a certain extent, I'm quite pleased that he's got the deal he did.
Yeah.
Because he had a fantastic rookie season at right guard. They had that stupid game where they tried to fit him in at center, and everyone was like, he did a good job. It's like, why are you even thinking of playing this guy at center? The guy's playing great at right guard. Just leave him there. And then they go and get Gabe Jackson for some reason, and then redo his deal. So they eat a lot of dead money because he was useless, and they had to get rid of him. And because Gabe Jackson came in, they go and shift Damian Lewis to left guard, and it took him 2 years to adjust. Like, the Seahawks could have ended up being in a position where they were paying Damian Lewis, and he could be your right guard of the future. But I think they blew his career. So I'm glad that he's gone somewhere else to that. And I hope they're not going to make the same bloody mistake with anybody else that they draft this year. Go and get some guys who are comfortable, who fit where they are. It's one of the little issues that I have with the Fatanu thing, because, if he comes in, I think a lot of people say, he's the left guard. I think he'll end up at right tackle, but he's not played right tackle. So I think that that could potentially be a question mark. Obviously, Fuaga's played right tackle, and Mims has played right tackle, and Goyton's played right tackle. So they'd be a lot more comfortable there. But I think you've got to put square pegs in square holes, and sometimes they haven't done that.
No, agreed.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting, and it's we're just excited about the potential that this draft could bring, and I'm really hoping that they still go get a quarterback. I guess for me, Penix and Rattler are the 2 guys that would just excite me, especially where they are. But I agree, I could see John sort of moving down, accumulating some stuff, and because they're, like you said, they're potentially day 2, day 3 guys, or at least Penix is a day 2 guy. So, but Rob, we really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us for this long and diving into the draft, free agency. What do you got going on? How can our viewers and listeners find you in your all your stuff?
Well, obviously, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. is where a lot of the written, well, it's where all of the written stuff is. And I have a YouTube channel, which includes at the moment interviews with players. I'm working on, a couple of other interesting ones there potentially coming up, but I've got 4 player interviews on there. All of my thoughts will go on that channel. If you can cope with some of day job stuff on social media, then on Twitter X at Rob Staton as well, I will be posting all my thoughts on the Seahawks, and all my articles and links and videos go on there too. And you said there you hope they draft a quarterback. My prediction, as I say right now, is it's probably right tackle at 16 or trade down. I think if they trade down, probably more likely that they then do take an interior offensive lineman like a Cooper Beebe or a Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think they'll play at guard rather than center. And then they only brings the quarterback into play if they can get back into the second round. So I don't know how likely that is, but these are all things that I'll talk about on SeahawksDraftBlog.com.
Absolutely. So guys, make sure you go check it out. SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, we appreciate it. And hopefully get you on maybe after the draft, kind of see what happens, and kind of break it down after that.
Anytime, guys. My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Guys, that was Rob Staton joining us again on the show. It's awesome having Rob on, man. Just especially this time of the year. We are 5-ish weeks out from the draft, give or take. However you want to do the math, but we're getting really close. The free agency frenzy is kind of settling down now, and now it starts to become a focus, especially since what we've done, plugging some holes. Like a few days ago, people were like, "Oh my God, we have no linebackers, we have no safeties." Well, that's kind of quieted down a little bit.
The sky was falling.
It's quieted down a bit, right? Because we got 2 guys there. We have a safety. You have Julian Love, and the young guys that we've talked about that can bring it. But talking with Rob, man, just especially on the quarterback situation, and the thing that stuck out for me, and I get your thoughts about when he sort of said with Geno Smith and Sam Howell. I know you like the move, but I mean, you probably in a little bit of agreement. There's just not a lot of excitement happening. And what is the plan if there is one?
Yeah, it's like, don't get me wrong, I really like the Sam Howell pick, but the Sam Howell pick to me is, and I was actually talking about this with another guy that we have on quite frequently, and Chris Clough. Is it a Charlie Whitehurst situation from a few years ago, or is it a Matt Hasselbeck situation from the Holmgren era, where you trade for a guy and you let him develop for you? Because that was the one thing with Charlie. You had him here behind Matt. He never really developed into anything. Like I don't think he actually he was at one game he played, which got us into the playoffs versus the Saints, the Beastquake game.
7-9.
But he wasn't spectacular in that game. Like, it wasn't like, holy shit, like, why have we been sitting Charlie Whitehurst? However, when they brought Hasselbeck in, they had Trent Dilfer here. Kind of like the Geno Smith, right? High draft pick, bounced around the league, so on and so forth, and then settled in Seattle. And he sat a year while Matt groomed, and then Matt took over. I really think training camp and the preseason this year are going to be huge for John Schneider's evaluation of Sam Howell and Mike McDonald on, okay, do we have a guy? Because like Rob said, they're going to trade down. I just don't see it anymore. I don't see them allocating a resource to a quarterback unless Michael Penix falls to them in a spot where they look at their board and go, he's the top player on our board right now, we're picking him. Because that's what, if you listen to John, it's no more drafting for need, because that's what got him in trouble those years.
Yep.
Between 2013 and I'd even say 2020, 2021 was they kept drafting for need. Well, you were missing on some talented guys. Like, you missed on Creed Humphrey because you went and drafted a receiver when you didn't need to do that. Like, take Creed Humphrey, he's the best available player there. And that's where I look at with Seattle here. Like, I don't see them taking a quarterback unless he's the best available player on the board. Now,
right,
you trade back down and you trade into like the 20s or the, maybe late 20s, and you get a higher second round pick and Penix is there, maybe. But I really think, just listening to John, and I know Rob kind of feels different about it, but quarterback's such a hard evaluation. It really, truly is, compared to a lot of other positions on where you project them to be. Because you look at how many first round top guys have been busts. And then how many guys you get, like a Brock Purdy, where he's Mr. Irrelevant, but he's somehow able to play. I'm truly interested to see what Howell does with proper weapons around him, a proper coaching staff, and how he develops, because there's a lot of guys out there, Lewis Riddick, Bucky Brooks, that really, really like this move for Seattle. And they call Howell a developmental prospect. Like he is so we're getting a guy that's 2 years younger than, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. Some of these guys are 25. He's only 23, but he's been in the NFL for 2 years already. And I think a lot of people need to go watch his college tape. Go watch his first 2 years in college when he had NFL talent around him at North Carolina. He lit up the SEC. His junior year, which is the year he came out for, he lost a bunch of talent there at North Carolina. He had very few NFL caliber players around him. So he turned into more of a rushing quarterback that year just to survive. That was kind of how I felt watching him last year. Like, you watched that Seahawks game. I rewatched it the other day versus the Commanders. Sam Howell looked better than Geno Smith. People may disagree with me on that, but he looked better. He made more big-time throws in that game than Geno did. So it'll be time and tell. And this isn't us hating on Geno, but it's the reality of it. And I'm going to be a realist. Geno Smith is not the quarterback that's going to take us to a Super Bowl.
Right.
He's not.
Right.
It's not in his makeup, because we can add pieces here and there, but Geno's not getting younger. Geno's in his mid-30s now. He's 34 this year. And I'm not turning around and saying Sam Howell's the guy that's going to get us to a Super Bowl. But there needs to be a plan. Maybe Sam Howell's the stopgap, or the next stopgap till they can get a guy. I would like to see next year, for me, Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers are the two guys I have circled as potential quarterbacks next year for the draft. But I think if this year doesn't go the way John wants it to at that position, I think you'll see that finally take a swing at it. We're finally going to go and do something about it, because we can't keep playing in this middle ground.
And I think that's to Rob's point. Like, it's like, okay, let's take a swing next year, the year after that, and here's Sam Howell as another bridge stopgap kind of guy. And I know what you're saying, and I think that's why you're like, man, if Quinn Ewers plays as good as people think he might, then you really got to swing for the fence. Like, you might have to give up a lot of draft capital, because as we see this team, the way they're even assembled now, this is a team that can compete. Like you said, maybe not take you to the promised land of the Super Bowl, but win 10 games, or maybe even 11 games, or, you kind of hover around 8, 9, 10, 11, take your pick. And that's not going to be good enough to get you in a lottery or top 5 or whatever. So then you got to really be like, if we believe in these guys, like, of course, Quinn Ewers got to have a great year and fall up there. But as we've seen, it doesn't take a lot. I mean, look at, you have some success, and when you've already had that foundation, you look at a JJ McCarthy, who's now, his stock has risen so high that, there's some people calling him a top 5-er. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the draft. Like, Rob says he gets some things wrong. They could take one, and then we sit here and we're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, maybe they are, they're doing it now. But as we know, sort of where we're sitting, because we'll be in that same sort of position next year. So I think when you look at it, you have to look at it like, if you look at the guys, like you said, if you think highly on Penix or Rattler, I think you go and you go grab one of those guys. But
I think you're right, dude. I think you maybe do grab one of those guys and take a swing. I don't look at I would not be excited about Bo Nix. When we had Seahawks Nerd on the other day and we were talking about it, but Sam Howell to me is a higher version of Bo Nix. He's younger, better arm, can move the same, makes throws downfield. I just look at Bo Nix and Sam Howell and say it's a wash. They're the exact same prospect. I might get more out of Howell because he's been in the league for 2 years. So, it'll be interesting. I'm interested now with our linebackers being signed, and Jerome Baker and Dodson. I think those are 2 really good signings. But again, you can see there's a change coming. And I think what has occurred, and I didn't get a chance to ask Rob this, so I'm kind of regretting it, but my view of 2024 has changed a little bit. I think, and people are probably going to go the other way with this, but I look at 2024 as the reset, not a rebuild, not a retool, is a reset. You are resetting a lot of things in that building, coaching staff, players, salary cap, all this kind of stuff. to set yourself up for 2025 and 2026. And I know we've had some comments about people saying, well, they don't have many people under contract for 2026. They also have a massive amount of cap room next year. I think you're going to see a lot of these guys that should be free agents in 2026 do what John normally does. Extend guys in the later half of next season, get some guys under contract that are supposed to be, and you'll see it. But that's what they're setting up for. They're setting up to truly be competitive in the mid part of Mike McDonald's contract, year 2, 3, 4. That's when they're trying to go and say, hey, we're making that push now. And I think if it's not this year, it will be next year. They will get a quarterback. John Schneider will get a quarterback. I don't think he views Sam Howell currently as the answer, but I think he views Sam Howell as an upgrade over Drew Lock. And there's one key thing in this whole kind of thing. John said it in his, I think it was his show. He made a comment about how Drew truly never got to compete for the job because he got COVID and he couldn't actually compete for the job that year. And Geno just took the job and ran with it. I truly believe, and people may disagree, and John may never ever say this, I truly think John has never been truly over the moon with Geno. And I think even though he said Sam's coming in as the backup, because he said earlier in a week or two ago that Geno was the guy, I truly think he's going to let this is going to play out as a competition and people don't realize it. And if Sam does do better in the preseason, Sam Howell may be the day one starter because yes, you've committed this money to Geno, but I don't think this team is going to be built on, hey, we've committed money to a certain person, they're going to start. And I think John truly wants to see Geno have to compete for his job and honestly outright win it without a asterisk of, hey, there's COVID or whatnot. Because I don't know, man, like last year watching it, Drew Lock to me looked similar to Geno in that game. Like it didn't to me, like I didn't get blown away by Geno last year and I didn't get blown away by Drew. I don't know. It's an interesting kind of conversation to have that I think Howell's here truly to compete for the job.
And that's what a lot of people thought when Drew Lock came in and played, especially against that Eagles game. Like, man, they were really similar. And you know what? I agree to your point. Like, it should be an open competition. This is not, Geno Smith is not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Joe Burrow. Like, so competition brings out the best. And you bring in a guy who's 23 and shows a lot of promise. Like you said, you're high on him. I hope they compete. I hope it's not already solidified that he's our week 1 starter. I mean, that to me would be kind of foolish. And I don't think Mike McDonald and John Schneider are that. So you come in, you have an open competition. If Sam blows it out the water, man, and it's like you look at each other and be like, how can we not start this guy? Then good. And then start him and then see what he does. Because at least you get to see sooner rather than later, and then you can move on from there. If he kills it in camp, you almost have to start him and then see what happens. Guess what? You can always reverse it and hey, Geno, you're back in. If it's just terrible the start of the season, you know what you got in Geno. It's not like he's gonna come into camp and here's the other thing. It's not like Geno's got to work with a bunch of new dudes. I mean, yeah, you're learning a new offense with Ryan Grubb, but you sort of already know what you got there. So I think it would be smart that this is an open comp.
Well, that, and if they do end up taking like a Michael Penix or a Spencer Rattler and they blow it up in the preseason, you don't have a big committal to Sam Howell. You may cut Sam Howell or turn around and trade him.
Yeah.
People got to remember that Matt Flynn year when they drafted Russell, they had Tavares Jackson, who was the incumbent at that point. They signed Matt Flynn to big money. They turned around and traded T-Jack to Buffalo.
Right.
The end of camp. So it could happen that they could go and say, hey, cool, we got Michael Penix. He fell to us perfect. We draft him.
Sam Penix.
Sorry, you know what? You're out of town. Or they might even decide to eat Geno's contract and trade Geno out of town and go from there. Like you just don't know. It's going to be really interesting.
Really interesting, man.
Yeah, I don't know, man. The quarterback thing's even gotten kind of even more murky now that we've even added Sam to this conversation. So
yeah, it has. It is interesting, but awesome having Rob back on the show again, man. Guys, if you haven't done it already, go check him out at SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Tons of good insight. He's always putting out new content. Also, go find him on. He's also on Twitter or X, right, at Rob Staton. And so urge you to go over there if you haven't already and check out Rob's stuff. And we love having Rob on And yeah, it's going to be awesome having him back on. Probably sometime after the drafts, and we could look at sort of kind of how things are set a little more and see what the Hawks do, because we absolutely love this time of the year. So that's gonna be it for us, man, today, and we are gonna check you guys out next time.
Sounds good, man. Looking forward to it.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.